Welcome back to Council's Judgment, the premier competitive Canadian Highlander podcast. I am your host, Tyler Woolley. It's great to be back. And as usual, I have my faithful co-hosts with me, Spencer Kanaka
Yo, yo.
and Sasha Christensen. How's it going today, boys?
Oh, we're alive.
Yeah,
Exciting
so
points change day.
yes, and that's what's brought us out of podcast retirement. We do apologize to everyone. We've had between all of us 3 rounds, 4 rounds of COVID, and immense sicknesses and work, and it's great to be back. We're happy to hopefully put out some content in the next few months, and yeah, so just thanks for sticking with us. Hopefully, this finds ears and people haven't unsubscribed. And yeah, today we're going to talk about a couple of things. The main ones being the very recent, as of today, points changes with Strip Mine being lowered to 1 point, Ren and Six increasing from 0 to 1 point, and Thassa's Oracle decreasing from 7 points to 6 points. So we're going to talk a little bit with these two very handsome and capable counselors about the reasoning behind these changes. And then we will do a quick overview of some of the new decks or new breakout cards over the last few months and what we think of them. Not so much, obviously, like a set review, but just kind of a all encapsulating new cards that have impressed us.
Yeah, to be clear, not set review, as per Wooly's request.
Yes, this is not a set review podcast, so no sarcastic remarks in the Discord, please.
There's only like two playable cards from Bloomburrow anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's a new set since Bloomburrow.
Although Ben did say that Duskmourn was going to be like really broken and might have pointed cards in it or something to that effect, and I was like, I don't know. There's some good cards, but nothing busted really.
Let's get right into it then and talk about some of these recent changes. Just from talking with both of you separately and together, I know a couple of these I was not surprised on, and I thought they were both going to happen sooner rather than later. And then one I was quite surprised on. We'll start with Strip Mine going down to 1 point. Strip Mine has kind of continually lowered itself over the last year and a half, and I think is now sitting at its proper spot at 1 point. So, Sasha, do you want to just take us through your thought process on this one? I know this is something you've been talking about for quite a while, even just since you've been on the council.
Yeah, there's a direct correlation to the amount of time I've spent on the council and Strip Mine's points value going down and Crop Rotation's points value going down. And a lot of it just has to do with the play patterns that Strip Mine used to enable that were really powerful and really difficult to interact with, denying opponents mana so they can't develop properly, based on the premise of a game that goes longer and you're under less tension and under less threat. That's just not the way our format is anymore. Like when Strip Mine was at 3 points, I struggled to find a way that it could ever be playable. And even at 2, we've seen it not be especially good. And the real tension in my mind between this is we have Wasteland sitting at 0 points. And if you look at any of the decks nowadays, the number of basics they run is incredibly low. Like, unless you're a 1 or 2 color deck, where, let's be clear, Strip Mine isn't usually that good against those decks anyways, Wasteland's going to do the job. Like, the number of times that you Strip Mine a basic is so low. And so, even at 1 point, I think that it is... I'm skeptical of how much this chip pushes the needle on it as an archetype, or as like a play pattern defining card, but it's at least closer to where it should actually be on the points list.
Yeah, Spencer, do you have anything to build off that? I know this is, again, something you've been talking about fairly passionately for a while, especially if I remember correctly, this got voted through on the last points change, but it was close enough that you decided to wait and re-vote on it in the future.
Yeah, 100%. Strip Mine's actually, yes, I was actually one of the people that opposed it, even though I'm in favor of the play pattern. I opposed it for meta considerations and also for play experience. some player experience factored into that more for me. I like the play patterns around low resource games myself. It reminds me more of like Legacy, Modern, Vintage, Dual Commander, etc. So I think that I'm not opposed to it, but a lot of people whinge really hard about LD in our format. But also primarily, I think this is because a lot of people keep extremely greedy keeps with 1 or 2 lands. Either they're like a port from CDH or Commander, and they're used to maybe having some more time to build up, or just a different strategy. So like I often find like people are like, oh, I got really goozled by that wasteland, or like they had a mock start and I didn't get my 3rd land drop, and I feel like they probably lost that game no matter what. Like also to be clear, like even like extremely skilled players and a lot of people's deck lists, like you'll see them play like 33, 34 lands in a mid-range, even if it's a blue or green deck with low mana sources. Like that's the equivalent of playing 21 lands in a 60 card deck, like which is kind of like, in Delver territory. Sure, there's decks like with lots of pitch spells and like pure cantrips and legacy that might play like 16, 18 lands, but we're getting closer to that than we are to the average like standard deck playing like 22 to 24, or like some modern decks are trying to play like 4 drops playing like 23, etc. So I just find that people have this super low land count and they enter a low resource game where they get mental misstepped or wastelanded, or their bird or acceleration gets bolted or removed, or etc. And then they don't get to play their 3 or 4 drop and they're surprised. And my answer to that is like, I think that's mostly to do with those decks, which is a tempo play, really expose people's deck building decisions. That's a really long rant that doesn't actually have much to do with strip mine, but a little bit about philosophy around why I was against it, which is I'm actually personally in favor of it and I like it. But I think a lot of people will have an NPE about it. Having said that, I think it's just time to rip the Band-Aid.
Yeah, and those kinds of negative play experiences, Spencer, you really hit it on the money in saying that exposes some errors in deck building. Like, for example, I was looking at a recent like top 8 Jeskai deck from a Canlander tournament that was playing, as you said, Spencer, 34 lands, and that for reference is the equivalent of 20 and 60 card. This deck was playing the equivalent of 6 3-drops in a 60 card deck, and then 4 4-drops, and just with 20 lands equivalent. And just for comparison, the Boros energy deck in Modern, which is like this hyper lean to the ground deck, trying to be efficient, doesn't play cantrips, but it doesn't really need to. It plays 1 to 2 less 4-drops and 2 less 3-drops. That really exposes that and 3 more lands. That should tell you that there's some mistakes happening in terms of how we're building our mana bases. If we just build them a little better, I promise you won't be as abused by Wasteland as Strip Mine anymore.
Can I just step in for 1 sec, just to say, like, as someone I know, like, I haven't been playing that much, but like before I got sick and I was playing Jeskai and Blue White and had like a pretty good run where I went undefeated twice, but had a draw both times, so didn't get a win, and I had a couple 3-1s or something. But like I was playing 40 lands in Blue White and 39 in Jeskai. And like I just, for the life of me, like I guess it comes down almost to like, if you're gonna spike a tournament or something, maybe you want to shave a couple lands because you want to draw gas more or something. But like it's obviously the variance is inherently higher with more cards. But like I just don't, and like I know there's very successful players who play lower land counts exclusively, and yeah, like I just can't do it. I need, even in my ponder, preordained, brainstorm, consider opt decks or whatever. Like if I'm trying to cast multiple counter spells in the same turn, or casting 4-drops and 5-drops, which I do like to do, then I'm sleeving up at least 37, 38 lands.
Yeah, like 100%. Like a Boros energy deck trying to just flashback Flage or cast a couple One Rings is on like 23 lands, just on like the latest like MTG Goldfish. So that's a pretty aggressive deck. And I mean, I've consistently always played like 35, 36 lands plus Moxen in aggressive or mid-range aggressive strategies. Like my Nadu decks usually have 36, 37 lands, and I'm playing every like good dork, even some 2-mana dorks, sometimes cantrips, plus 3 Moxen. So I think that reduces your like need to mulligan. And I see like other mid-range decks where they're on like 34 or 33 lands, plus 3 cyclers and 3 Moxen, and they're always mulliganing for mana sources. Or I see them keep a hand with like 1 land, or like land mox cycler, but then you're essentially like you're down low on cards just to make your land drop, and you're expecting to cast this 4-drop. So unless you cheat it into play or they have any interaction for it, like if you get tempoed out by a Wasteland, a Daze, Spell Pierce for like your Minxcamboo or whatever, you're probably losing that game.
Yeah. No, I think it's hopefully, I mean, it's again, people far more successful than me are playing these lower land counts, so it's very possible that there's something to it and I'm overthinking it. But yeah, I think we're at a point where Strip Mine is a card that should be able to be played without the strategy being I'm going to strip lock my opponent. And at 2-3 points, that it has to be a centralized theme of your gameplay versus just being able to be like, oh, I'm, Boros aggro or, Gruul monsters or something, and you can go double mocks and you have the option around a couple for like 1 point cards that can fit your deck at this point. So yeah, very in favor of this. This was a good change. And as I think the council knew, it was probably overdue based on how the vote went last time. Any closing thoughts on Strip Mine before we continue and soldier on here?
I'm not really afraid of it strip blocking people. I think that's pretty edge case. And if someone's into that, they're probably like not winning tournaments typically. Um, like if you assemble it as like your like plan C or whatever, and it's part of like a broader strategy, like I think that's fine. It's really gonna like punish, I think, people's 4-color no land mana bases. I think also like aggro outside of like the Victoria meta doesn't do very well, broadly speaking. So maybe this adds a little tempo nature to those decks. And all the 3 mocks non-blue decks that we see, I think like they actually have some choices to make now. It's like, well, are they going to be Strip? Are they going to be Ancient Tomb? Are they trying to play like 1-point tutor? Are they trying to play fourth? Like, and as we're going to like look towards adding more 1 points for 2025, I think that like 2 mocks plus a split of 1 pointers versus 3 mocks versus which 1 point you take actually is becoming an interesting choice for those deck builders.
Extremely agree.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, moving on to the next change here, and that is Thassa's Oracle. Moving down to 6 points from 7 points. And as the only person to win with Thassa's Oracle in Victoria this year, I approve of this change. I do think again this is a bit of an overdue change from like a relict era where Oracle was fairly dominant for a period of time. I do think that there's a number of ways the meta has just been able to attack Oracle to be fairly. It'll show up. It can win a tournament, but it's as like a plan A deck, it has not been performing very well. And especially when compared to other like A plus B combo, where like Time Vault, which is probably the premier combo deck of the format, has its big card at 7 points, but its enablers are 0 points. Flash Hulk, which has seen some success, and I know does see success outside of our local metagame, again, has its main cards at 7 points and then has free tutors it can play and setups and everything. Whereas like Thassa's Oracle plus Pact is still sitting at 8, with Pact being a playable magic card outside of the deck and being deserving of a point on its own. I do think this was a good change. And Spencer, I know you'd been talking about this one. Is there anything I missed, or is that kind of where you guys were landing on it?
No, I think that's pretty much where we landed on it. For me, also, I've a lot of combo players. Sometimes they tend to herd mentality onto what they perceive to be the best AB combo in the format, and not like lock in the reps. But I do think that it's nice for at least maybe potentially they have kind of a couple good options. Like there's not just one Oracle deck. I think even there's a lot of Oracle combo control shells. I also think it goes in like Doomsday Piles and like various other graveyard flip decks. So I think that there's a couple builds for that. So some deck exploration and deck building to go on there. And maybe now there's actually like a choice between like, do I want to be a combo control Oracle deck or with different color variation, or do I want to be a Time Vault deck? And versus like blank to the board, having Urza's Saga backup plan, maybe you're on Paradox, Academy versus like hard 4-color, 3-color, playing to the board control, etc. And I think that there's just a bit of a choice there now, and I think that's good. And if I was to give preference to like the AB combos as far as player experience, I'd prefer like to not see Flash be as good as those two and more edge case. I think that's unpopular with some of the common players, but Flash just has a bit more potential for downside, I think, in our format than maybe Thassa's Oracle or Time Vault does at the moment.
Yeah, I definitely feel like this change is mostly housekeeping, and again, in line with, as the slide illustrates, this setup has always been 8 points opposed to 7, so this is really bringing it back in line with it being a truly 7-point combo. And as you said, Spencer, it's totally true that Thassa at 6 gives a point to some more fringe applications of Thassa's Oracle. Doomsday is a deck that you can build with Black Lotus or Thassa's Oracle. It works perfectly either way. I definitely favor Lotus because Lotus is a busted magic card when you draw it, and Thassa's Oracle tends to not be. Just a normal game of Magic. But having it be at 6 means that there is a tangible benefit now to actually including in a Doomsday. And we see other applications like the Thought Lash, Field of Dreams. So you can tutor your Thassa's Oracle by exiling until you hit it, draw it for the turn, and then exile the rest of your deck and cast Oracle. That's a really neat deck and a really cool application for it that has always been highly overpointed. And now there's a bit more room to explore that style of deck.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, and I can see there being, I know for when I first saw this, I kind of brought out this like bug Oracle shell that I had shelved for quite a while. You know, Connor, a local player, played like 4-color Oracle for a time. And I think it's enough very good cards have been printed since that I think bug Oracle could be very good. So I will be probably revisiting that potentially as soon as Monday. All right, now we go to the controversial pointing of this go round, at least in my eyes, and that is Renin 6 moving from 0 to 1 and kind of moving. There's a ton of cards that could be 1 point and maybe potentially down the road are going to be 1 point. And yeah, I found it interesting that this was kind of the first real, I don't know, shockers, like way too explosive a word. But, there's been cards that have moved to a point. Lots of cards have moved to 1 point recently, which is great. And I feel like this is the one that's going to confuse people the most, or just have people be like, what? Like, why is Renin 6 a point over Minsk and Boo or Urza's Saga? A million other very powerful magic cards with lots of text. Spencer, do you want to walk us through kind of the philosophy behind this pointing?
Sure. I think we were trying to address a threat from the blue mid-range decks, and both Czech and Jessica Green, specifically the 4-color versions, and both Czech and Jessica Green. I strongly feel this is the overlap card and a bit of the glue that holds those decks together. Similar way that I think Minsk and Boo holds those decks together, this one actually does. It also leads to more, I think, like non-games in some ways, but it's difficult to see that it was a non-game. I've tested a lot with this card in other formats as well, and I just feel like it's quite strong. And it fits the profile of like a banned card, other formats, low CMC, just engine, and like definitely loops. We kind of can like justify the tie-in with Strip to prevent any sort of lock in that regard. It definitely feels more of a blue mid-range multicolor card than like an aggressive card, which was also a factor for me anyway. I don't know, Sasha, do you have any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I don't personally feel like Strip Mine plus Renin 6 is a particularly powerful thing. I know that there were other perspectives on that, and this was a way to help assuage those concerns about Strip Mine going down. And personally, I'd much rather live in a world where a 4-color mid-range enabler sees a point where Strip Mine does not. So that's the real consideration there. And to be fair, Renin 6 has always been in the contention of these kinds of cards that we talk about for, okay, what are we going to point from the 4-color decks to try and disincentivize that? And we've seen over time that players have come to the conclusion that, yes, 4-color is just far better. And while we have seen some improvements in the last couple of months, specifically around the Surveil lands and people trying out these 3-color decks instead, it still feels like 4-color is the dominant choice. And Ren and 6, as you said, Spencer, has a subtle way of actually enabling that. Minskin Boo, it's a powerful card, it wins games, but fundamentally it's a big 4-drop that beats your opponent's face and then kills them. Ren and 6 will kill them in a way that they cannot interact with as easily, and you will win games off of Ren and 6 that you will not fully appreciate that you won because of Ren and 6 in a way that you do because of Minskin Boo. And you can always replace Minskin Boo with another big dumb 4-drop. There is no other card that's equivalent to Ren and 6. And so that's in the end why we chose to select this guy as the first amongst all these other cards. And that's not to say we won't look at them in the future. I'm personally very in favor of looking at them in the future. But this was an easy place for us to get to for this particular announcement.
Nice. Yeah, I think those are very good explanations. My only worry, I guess, and more of an initial thought, and as someone who prefers my decks to be less colors, and like I've played, red green monsters or Naya, even just different decks where I'm not like splashing Ren and 6, and it's like, oh, this is like a really good card for my red green deck, as opposed to a card that's like, oh, I'm playing this card in my 4-color pile kind of thing. And so I'm always like, I'm a bit squeamish always where I'm like pointing cards out of tier 2, tier 3 decks to like target the suit decks. But you could be absolutely right, and hopefully this can still see play in those 2-color decks if they move to like 1 accelerant plus some 1s, or Mox Crypt and 2 1s or something. So yeah, I just hope it doesn't. My concern would be it becomes unplayable, but I've been wrong almost every single time I've thought that when a card goes to 1. So I will hopefully be wrong on this one as well.
I totally hear your trepidation on that, and it's like definitely a concern in the back of my head. I think that because there is a bit of a broad desire for the rest of the council and myself to like point some more 1-pointers for next year, specifically the beginning of the season anyway, and looking at doing a larger one at some point next year as well. I think that the hope is that those 2-3-color decks will have a few 1-pointers to choose from, and if instead of if they're not doing triple mocks or two and an off color or crypt mock spread, like they'll actually have some ones to choose from. Maybe this is like one of the ones that like red green would want to choose. But like a Naya spread or something like that, obviously it's pretty contentious to give up this for like 4th. But maybe if there's a couple other 1-pointers, they'll want to do double mocks and then actually have some 1-pointers to fill out the rest of their points.
Mm-hmm. Put in Strip Mine, Strip Mine, Red and 6, 4th, and you just need 1 more and you're there.
2.
Perfect. All right. Well, that was really well explained and thought out. I appreciate that. And yeah, well, I guess time will tell where the metagame lands. I do want to say that I do appreciate the thought behind and the changes that have been happening. I do think are attempting to incentivize different card choices and not have the format homogenized as much, and land with these like 4-color decks being like unbeatable. And so I think that's good. I think we want variation, and we want people to both, I guess, I don't know. For me, I'm always conscious of like budgetary concerns as well. And like even in 10 proxy, if people are playing 2 colors and they're just like so far behind because the power level is so ridiculous or anything, like I'm glad that it's consistently being looked at, that the soup decks be put in check a little bit. So kudos on that.
And I also think like, and when we first started talking about Modern Horizons spoilers, we talked about like the excitement of, Grixis and Czech being like catapulted into like highly playable, and maybe even like Jund and Marduk because of all the good black cards. Black had its time as like the worst color in our format for a long time, so it's nice to see some of these other decks go and be tier 1 for a bit. And I think people are quick to knee-jerk response a little bit on some of the newer cards like Frog deserving a point and whatnot. I think like potentially it does at some point, who knows? But also just because, you lose to a card like in 2 tournaments, like an async or a Discord or a Monday, and it's its first time being printed, doesn't mean it's like auto point, like let people adjust and react. And I think that takes a lot of time for a lot of Magic players. if everyone can kind of like stir themselves like into a pile online, or within their like, community that they play with, you can get really fixated on certain ways of being. But if you zoom out at like the meta as a whole, which I think we're about to talk about, I think it's like looking at a pretty good spot.
And there is
Totally.
this phenomenon where if a player loses to, in this example, all the new cool and very powerful black cards, they go, oh, this is absurd, it's way too good. And what that's really manifesting as is a disruption to their equilibrium, which was bias against any kind of black archetype. So suddenly it makes a lot of sense if they have a bit of time to actually grok that, oh, okay, this isn't something being overpowered. Things are reaching a new equilibrium where all the different colors and different archetypes are a bit better represented.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of nicely leads us into our next topic here, which is just taking a broad scale look at where the format sits right now or where the metagame is. I'm going to let Spencer lead us off just because I think he's been by far the healthiest of the three of us and has been able to attend more events and has probably been a bit more active. So I definitely have some thoughts here that I'm happy to share, but I'm going to just let Spencer lead us off where he thinks we're at right now.
I think we're in a pretty good spot. If you look at like the Canadian Highlander winner database, we see like a pretty healthy spread of decks comparatively to, let's say, late 2023, when I'd say there was predominantly various flavors of Vault and Jeskai Green. So I think that, and obviously Red Green aggro was making a good appearance during that time in early 2024. So now I think we're seeing a bunch of new archetypes that haven't been really played before. We're seeing some old ones that have been revitalized. We're seeing combo well represented. We're seeing various types of blue. We're seeing other wedge mid-range decks. We're seeing stacks kind of more like D&T style decks. We haven't seen like as many traditional D&T decks. I think that deck has kind of like lost a little bit. We don't really see as much aggro anymore because of some of the new cards been printed for sure. But I think that there's a lot of new decks have become viable. A lot of new archetypes have become revitalized. I think that's pretty awesome. And then, of course, it always takes a little time to balance that out meta-wise. Also, it takes time for people to react to a new archetype. If something's graveyard-based, Reanimator's seen a pretty strong comeback in the format. But then, and there's other decks that utilize the graveyard. Someone puts in one or two, like one Cling to Dust in their deck, and then they might face it 2 rounds out of 2 tournaments, lose, and they think it's overpowered, and they don't know how to respond to it without a deck change. And it's like, well, you didn't. Your variance level here is quite high, so I think you have to play the match quite a bit, have to add in several cards that are in the matchup, understand the matchup, what you need to mulligan for, what you're trying to play, and understand that like they don't always draw the part of their deck that turn one utilizes the graveyard as well. So having plans within plans. So I think people sometimes just need to give it a little bit. I doubt very many people play 10 plus matches of the same archetype versus same archetype a day for like a week, unless they're like practicing for like a big money tournament. If you look at like the competitive money tournaments that are playing for like duels or high stakes, we do see like a lot of the combo and blue mid range and the outlier Maverick decks that I'd expect to see in like any Eternal format high stakes, because it draws out the kind of players that want to play those types of games or have the reps with them.
For sure. Yeah, I can agree with a lot of that. Sasha, what about you? Where do you think we're at based on your opinion?
I definitely think the format's in a good spot. I have enjoyed returning and just beating face with just red-green blitz. That deck has gotten some notable upgrades from the last couple sets, which has been delightful to see, and still kills people dead pretty easily. And I do think that the one thing to note from the last couple of months post MH3 is that spell-based combo has been markedly worse. All of the mid-range decks got these really good upgrades, very powerful threats. In some case, we got new decks through things like Nadu, but spell-based combo really got basically nothing. And so I think that that is a consideration. But if that's an archetype that's going to be a bit weaker, that's not a bad thing from a meta perspective. So I would say it's probably on the upside that spell-based combo is at its current spot, even if I personally may want it a little bit higher. It doesn't mean we're going to end up in a bad metagame.
Well, you obviously haven't been testing Mono Red Storm, because I can tell you it's as good as it's ever been, which is terrible.
Quite the statement.
bold hot takes from the The Mono Red Storm.
Listen, if we get commanders, then you can play your Ral, and maybe it'll be bad still, but it'll be a
Well,
bit better.
yeah, you play it like Commander, and you just glue Ral to the top of your deck at all times, and you're fine.
Well, you see the one of companion like in Dual Commander, you have the Luras.
Yeah, so I generally agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I think to have a stronger opinion, I probably need to like boot up the MTGO leagues again, which we ran quite successfully for a portion of the summer. Like I think we ran 7 or 8 events. But even with, I think those events actually even tinted my perspective a little more because it feels like all the Magic I'm playing is being won by triple Mox or Crypt Mox, Ancient Tomb, one pointer. So I'm getting bombarded by fast mana from all sides. And so I don't know if I definitely have a bit of a personal bias in thinking that like fast mana probably needs to get pointed further. I do like a lot of the new decks. I'd like that black is good again. As someone who enjoys casting black cards outside of Entomb, it's nice to have that be a consideration and like be like, oh, I really like these 6 black cards, but I can't play them. Now it's like, oh no, like there's like 20 really powerful, really good black cards. And then if you are base black, you can play tutors instead of moxes, or there's a lot of considerations, and it's definitely gained some powerful tools, which is nice. But yeah, my biggest bone of contention is just like how many high roll games I lose to turn 1 mox. But I did bring out Jeskai and blue white control like decks that historically should kind of smash on those triple mox decks and had a lot of success. So I think it's a bit of my tilty walrus factor in losing finals to those kind of decks, but I do think they are still attackable, and that especially with the very recent resurgence of more aggressive, like I don't know, I just hesitate to call a deck playing like Barrow-Goyf or something an aggro deck. Like a true aggro deck in the form of like Red Green Blitz has been putting numbers up again locally and taking advantage of the higher mana curves, I think. So that was good to see. And yeah, hopefully we can just continue to get players making interesting deck building choices. I think that's always kind of my number one priority. And I did spend some time in the summer playing Dual Commander, and I didn't even think I was going to enjoy it at all, but the gameplay was really great. And I just found myself thinking a lot of the time, like, man, this gameplay is really great. I wish I didn't have a command. And like just following that banned list, which is just like very, very strict on fast mana. Like it basically doesn't exist. Like I think like the spirit guides are the best ones you can play. And like then because of that, cards like Vinskamboo and the initiative threats are all like good, but they're not like super overpowered because you have to accelerate into them using dorks or like one shot fast mana, and so the usage was like much less so. So I did enjoy that. I just didn't enjoy the fact that I had to cast commanders and play against them. I don't think either of you. No, we had a couple people trying out dual command.
I've been jamming.
Have you been jamming it?
I've been jamming quite a bit of Dual Commander actually.
Nice.
Online. Yeah, I was trying to rack up some MTGO wins with it.
Yeah,
It has like some similar feels. There's some archetypes that don't really translate over, which is kind of annoying. I mean, everyone plays Eternal formats for different reasons. My problem with Dual Commander is that I don't think a lot of the archetypes I enjoy in Canlander or Legacy translate to it very well. So I don't enjoy some of the games, but I enjoy the games I think are sweet. And I agree that like their ban list, it's just I think it's a little aggressive. I think they could probably like let the band-aid off on some of it, but if they're just essentially like going after Power 9 and some of the enablers, I think that's fine.
And I will say, I do think that it would be an interesting thought experiment in terms of if you were going to rebuild, build a different Highlander format because we have not enough already, surely. how would a banless 100 card format look? And I think that is an interesting prospect. I do think there are things that we can do in the auspices of Canadian Highlander to make it more accessible, easier for people to reach for, and also have less of those negative play experiences. And to that end, we have been talking about what it would take to get fast mana pointed in a higher level. And so we've had some preliminary discussions about Moxen to 4. And it's something the councils will at least be looking at on some level, not preordaining anything actually happening, but I do want to say that it's definitely on our radar and definitely has negative play experiences, as well as obviously accessibility problems.
Totally.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing too, is like it doesn't matter obviously in the small events or like locals or 10 proxy or even 5 proxy or whatever, but it has definitely been an issue where I don't travel to bigger events because I just like can't play the decks I want to play. I am looking at moving a huge portion of my collection and potentially getting real copies of some of these cards, but that's not something that's going to happen anytime soon, and is definitely not something that the majority of players have the option to do. But yeah, I don't like budget concerns for like bannings or pointings or anything. Like I wouldn't want that to ever be a reasoning, because most of the communities are very proxy friendly, but it is interesting going to those bigger tournaments or looking at the results and being like, is this really indicative like of what the format is? And I feel like the answer is like almost always no.
Yeah, I mean, like a pillar of our format are triple Mox mid-range decks, and those decks cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $15,000 or what have you, CAD. So just for the 3 Moxen, let alone your extra $1,000 for the rest of the deck. So like, yeah, the results are warped in a very substantial way that bias things like reanimate or A+B combo and that sort of stuff.
I actually trouble the notion a bit that like triple mox is like the best spread for most decks. I definitely recall is still probably the best. I mean, you look at like most of the recent like, and even time walks in some cases like for Jeskai lately, but most of the Jack decks that have been winning lately are on recall. I think what Moxen enable when we're like allowing everyone to use them all the time is like players allows them to high roll. But like I don't actually think if you play like 10 versus 10 matches, like I think the recall or be able to find it will win you more games than like one mock start.
I buy that. I also think that Ancestor Recall is an expensive Magic card, and more so than
Totally. I guess I'm not considering this so much as like a thought exercise on budgetary concerns. It's more like the actual like raw power level. And I think that like the speaking to Tyler's like MPE about high roll fast mana decks, anyone that's played against Stompy and Legacy knows a lot about that as well. And like it seems that the variants that they find there, Ancient Tomb, Crypt, Mox, Chrome Mox, Simian Spirit Guide into their 3 or 4 drop is almost like similar enough to how it happens in Legacy, except that there's not the same amount of days force of will to like truly brown them for their hubris, And a lot of people, there's just not as much unconditional removal going around. Like a lot of people don't even like Assassin's Trophy and stuff like that, or like Get Lost. It's like the 2 mana, like maybe people play Molten Collapse. That's about it for like Planeswalkers or big ones. I quite like it. But the point is that like the medium style decks, which a lot of these 3 Moxen or Crypt Mox decks play out, like they essentially dump their hand to put in a 4-drop. And they might have one more in the holster, like one more play, if they have an ideal hand. And a lot of people aren't actually able to 1-for-1 that threat. A lot of these are also like initiative creatures or 2-for-1s in some cases, but sometimes they're just very efficient. But a lot of other players are either like, if they're also a mid-range deck, they're on the back foot. And a lot of people in the mid-range battles are not playing enough removal, so then they can't actually deal with what's on the board. They have no acceleration of their own. They have no way to interact, and then they like get swamped. But if they like were able to effectively either remove it, have like a response plan, like if someone else has a Moxen draw, like what's your plan? Like, does your hand just scoop? Then it probably sucked. I don't know. I don't lose a lot to honestly, I don't lose a lot to Moxen draws. I find that they're anemic a lot of the time. Sometimes if it's like a nut draw, then yeah, you're probably gonna lose. But you're gonna lose to a lot of things. And if you had nothing for their 4-drop on turn 2, like you're gonna lose to a 3-drop on turn 2. Like the game has so many powerful 3-drops and 2-drops now. And like if an initiative card on turn 2 gets you, you're probably dead to the WP on turn 2 or the Psychic Frog or the Ragavan turn 1 or whatever. There's a lot. I feel that these things are variance heavy and they do swing, but I think it also once again has a lot to do with like deck building considerations, like living by the sword and dying by the sword. Because I think a lot of the times people play a 3 Mox mid-range deck, face a 3 Mox or a Crypt mid-range deck, and they're like salty because they didn't draw their Mox. Their opponent drew Mox, and they're like, oh, well, they got the Mox and I didn't. I'm like, well, you're living by the sword, dying by the sword a little here, you know?
Welcome
That's
to the
just
joys of playing Power.
yeah, and I play a lot of have historically played a lot of aggressive 3 Mox or Crypt Mox mid-range decks and like can confirm like that's how that goes down.
Yeah, I think I mostly agree. I would push back that like I don't know. I basically stopped playing blue red, like Murktide, because I couldn't beat a result initiative threat. Like it wasn't even it was any other creature, even if it's like a 5/5, a 6/6, a planeswalker, whatever, I can dig out of it. But like I think just the side game piece is very hard to interact with, even if you are on like Jeskai or blue red or something. So I would push back that like I think like you can be playing every removal in the entire universe, but like you're still gonna die to like trap into empty throne or whatever.
Which is a little bit why like I think the 4 color decks just prey on those mid-range decks like Check and Jeskai Green both just have so many efficient threats plus the removal plus the counters
Yeah,
that these medium Mox decks just get kind of eaten alive by them generally speaking, I find anyway. And like I
yeah.
think the
Well,
stats
no, I
online support
agree.
that idea.
I agree. Like I mean, even like I played blue white, just like straight up like my back hurts boomer control.
Love it.
And I annihilate like I don't know, I think I played you in that tournament and like temporary lockdown to double Mox, like double guy start or something. And like I beat Jund in that tournament as well. Like I think temporary lockdown is like such an interesting card because it's absolutely insane, but like it does have very severe deck building constraints.
Yeah, but
But
we also have things like Wrath of the Skies now, which fills that role
yeah,
in a
which
better way.
well, I mean, but I was to have the density of those effects, you need to
Mhm.
play 3, 4 copies of them in Mystical Tutor or something to have it be like, oh, I have like full control over this. Like I'm fine, even
I
if they
like that.
have crypt or whatever. But the problem then still lies where it's like you still need to play some amount of like threats that kind of like stick out like a sore thumb in the deck list. But like I think you just need to play them because if someone has an early white plume that you can't counter, it's like, well, I'm dead. I can't attack. I wasn't planning on attacking anytime soon. So I do think that like that the initiative ones I think are the ones that bug me because it's a very I think it invalidates trying to not attack or try the combination of trying not to attack and trying not to like combo someone quickly makes that kind of deck like very, very hard to play. And maybe that's just how Magic,
I think that's
which
just
is
like the
very
attack that those
possible.
decks have on control, or else they wouldn't really have much going for them anymore because like they just get buried with the card advantage and the sweepers, just like other formats kind of thing. It's hard to get underneath them. It's just very
Yeah,
efficient. And the removal
totally.
is just, and now we're at the point where like removal, if people want to actually build their decks, like that is pretty consistent. And I think that one interesting thing to note about initiative is that like it's actually kind of fallen out of favor. Like I see more and more decks that are eschewing it. I mean, I personally like was off of it in a lot of creature combo decks because I find like you often lose if you're not playing red. So yeah, so you like maybe the Mardu and the Jund or like sometimes the Niagara decks are like all in on it, like a medium style deck. A lot of the other decks, you know, they're maybe on WPA if they're in white. That's about it. No one else is really like going hard on initiative. And even the like wedge aggro decks are kind of like, it's a 4 drop usually, not in my colors. I feel like the format has sped up a little bit, and now I like actually where initiative's at, where like sometimes it happens. Like before, it used to seem like 2 or 3 out of 4 matches were a fair match, and of those, almost every single time you had the initiative. Like every one of the tables was always an initiative battles. Now, maybe once a night I have a fair mid-range match where there's or a non-fair match where there's an initiative, but quite a bit of the time I feel like my initiative cards stay in the box these days. Maybe that's just anecdotal, but looking at like the Winter Archive, like there's just not a ton of non-initiative. Like there's just not as much as there used to be.
Yeah, which is good because I think that does mean people are bringing the right builds kind of thing, or adjusting their decks to be good against it, which is good.
People can adapt. Good job.
People, yeah. But yeah, no, I think I think overall it's in a good place to kind of summarize. And I think the council did a very good job in 2024 of, just taking action on some things. There was 4 different updates, I think, and there's the more one pointers, the better. I just think it's very interesting for deck building. I think we're never going to be a format like, everyone got so mad about commander or, standard bans or whatever, where like pointing is never taking the card out of a format. It's never affecting anyone's financial investment in the format, which I think is a great reason to have points over bans anyway. But I think it is I think it's a good thing to experiment from time to time and just look at, hey, like, are these things still going to see play at 1? Is the format still in a good place if we add 6 cards to the 1 point list or something?
Are there cards that have been 1 point for ages and need to get reevaluated given modern printings?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And like maybe there's probably, is there 6 1 point cards that now should be 0 and 6 1 point cards can take their place or whatever. And I know you guys are looking at that, and no, I appreciate it.
Yeah, Sasha's alluded to it and you've alluded to it, but yeah, like obviously we're in kind of like discussions over like a slew of cards, and it helps having the the Discord focus group, people doing that work as well to kind of like filter a lot of those ideas down to us, and then we can kind of just like discuss kind of like more like a top level, zooming out, looking at the stats. Always trying to give props to Select Clubs for the Canadian Highlander Winter Archive, kind of like helps make more data-driven decisions, which is good. And the survey results also helped a lot of like, I think, guide the philosophy of like the rest of this year for like moving forward as well, for myself anyway, but I'm pretty sure like maybe Sash, you want to speak to that a little bit as well.
I will say the thing that I found very, very reifying about the survey results were other people had my experience and were feeling the same thing, and that was really nice to see. And I'm not sure if that's just like, especially in our format where the metagames can be so disjointed, like the idea of what happens in one region is completely different than what happens in another, just based on like what pilots show up, what decks are in favor, who has what cards. Like those things should produce a situation where people have very disparate ideas about pointing. And the fact we got so many responses, which was so nice to see, and have that actually build a pretty solid image of what was happening, I found very reassuring, and it definitely made me feel like, okay, we're still in touch. We're not completely out here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that was such a great idea, and getting that survey out, it's just nice that there is such a passionate community to kind of help data-driven decisions, whereas in the past it's kind of in the dark. And then if people are complaining, but what? Like, we had no idea this would be unpopular. So yeah, no, I think that's really good. All right, we're gonna wrap up here. But before we say goodbye, we just want to touch on a few kind of interesting cards that we've seen from just newer cards that are kicking around the tables. I know there's a couple that are making a pretty big splash from this last set. Well, set plus commander set. What have you been seeing, Sasha, that's kind of caught your eye?
Well, as I said, I've returned to play Red Green Blitz, and let me tell you, the 4 cards on the top right here, Razorkin, Needlehead, Hired Claw, Wildfire Wickerfoot, and Emberheart Challenger, chef's kiss, just excellent additions to the roster. So nice to see, especially Hired Claw is just an extra like pseudo 2-power 1-drop. Just, I couldn't be happier to be playing that archetype right now. I do look forward to casting a big dumb miracle black card soon, but at least for the last week or two, yeah, I've been enjoying returning and having those really nice upgrades.
Nice. What about you, Spencer? What's been sticking out to you?
I mean, obviously the Pagani Fanatic, I feel like that's interesting for a lot of decks. Everyone started like trying to shove it both in Reanimator and very mid-range black decks. It's kind of made people pick up Imperial Seal and Worldly Tutor and Vamp Tutor, which I think is interesting. I don't find it very oppressive, honestly. I think it's good, don't get me wrong, but I think that all the top deck tutors are such card disadvantage, so you need to do that plus you need to have something that's valuable in your graveyard, plus you need to successfully cast this card just to like be parity. So yeah, I mean it's good. Don't get me wrong. And like it and Velveroth, too many
Moth.
something. The moth's sick, and I think that's a great pickup for Reanimator for another fatty, for like the mirror and other considerations. And I think it's pretty hot. It's been sweet seeing Oculus. That was a cool card. A lot of like decks want to fill their graveyard. It's very powerful. It's a nice mid-range card. Keen-Eyed Curator. I've been jamming that in a lot of green decks. I think it's quite strong. It often is a 7/7, I find actually. Yeah, a bunch of the mid-range decks kind of picked up some cool. Duskmourn was pretty okay. I wouldn't say it was like busted, but it definitely added a lot. Overlord of the Belmark has impressed me out of a lot of mid-range shells. It's kind of like this. It's good for like the same decks I think Fnatic's good in.
Totally. Yeah, I've been really impressed by Oculus, which goes without saying, but I do think it is interesting. I think we're leaning in a place again where like Unearth is a really good card. And I love Unearth. It's like one of my favorite like corner case cards where it's been like not that good for quite a while, but just with like Frog and Bowmasters and everything, like I'm liking like a bug kind of deck with, and I've been like slotting Unearth into like the majority of my black decks again. So I'm stoked on that.
I do think that the rise of black in our format has really shown that Reanimate's a absolutely messed up Magic card in fair applications too.
Yes.
And let me tell you, Unearth is still a fair bit of the way to Reanimate on its own.
Yeah, no, I mean it's Reanimate's a different discussion. Obviously, that card's insane. But yeah, I don't know. I'm still in the infancy almost with these sets because I was out for so long. But I am looking at kind of I'm hoping to explore a few of them as early as next week. As I think I'm gonna sleeve up like a bug, so not delirium, but just like bug graveyard, like mid-range kind of thing. That'll probably play a few of these.
I think Bug's a pretty sweet wedge that's a little bit unexplored. I think there's a lot of like graveyard synergy. Same with Esper. I mean, some people have been killing it with Esper, but I think that's another archetype that I think needs some fiddling with, and I think is quite powerful. It's playing a lot of the new powerful cards as well.
Yeah, I think people default to Jeskai when there's definitely some exploration to be done in Esper specifically. Now, with a lot of the more powerful tools that have been acquired in Black, there's more than one way to build a recall.
Yeah, and Jeskai definitely lends itself better to like the more initiative-driven metagame just because of the efficiency of the red removal. And there really is something to be said for the value of black, where even if you miss out on some of the hyper-efficient removal, you get some really good stuff. And if you're not going to be facing initiative threats every week, like, yeah, there's a good argument that Esper is better in your local metagame than Jeskai.
Jeskai,
Yeah.
Grixis, Dark Jeskai. Rate them 1 to 3.
Ooh, ooh. Dark Jeskai first. Sorry. Dark Jeskai for sure first. I think Grixis and regular Jeskai are actually like probably pretty comparable. They're good for different reasons and are good in different contexts. But yeah, I still think 4-color is better than any of them.
Yeah, I'd have to see. I think I sleeved up Grixis this week. Had a great round one, and then we had a tournament error that led me to drop from the tournament. So I'm looking forward to playing that one a bit more because it felt really good. And I think Grixis is really good and really underexplored. Like I think people are kind of clutching their swords to plowshares a little too tightly. And I think Grixis is just potentially better, like lower to the ground deck, and gives you some really interesting options. I'm all for it.
Yeah, and having tested it, the one thing that it's still kind of missing is a good threat suite, which is definitely what leads me to preferring check over it. But if we get there over the next little while, like I think the reasons to be going to 4-color will start to diminish because that really is the hole in that archetype. And once you get it, ooh, you'll be cooking.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I think especially now with like Frog and Oculus, and you get to be like a really good Dreadhorde Arcanist deck, which is awesome. I love that card so much. Yeah, it's interesting, and yeah, I'll continue to explore my recall decks outside of Jeskai for sure.
I think it's I like where we're at with the blue mid-range decks because I think there's actually like area to innovate still. I actually think that because the blue-black core is very strong and allows you to explore those wedges and those four-color wedges, versus it just being Jeskai or Jeskai green, and whether or not you want to play more threats or be more controlling. That makes it quite interesting because the blue-black core allows like
Yeah,
Esper and Bug
but
and Grixis to really like shine.
well, and the thing about black is like you can be like a black heavy deck, or you can splash it. Like if you get rewarded for playing a heavier black style with cards like Dothy Voidwalker potentially, or Shieldred or something where you're not just like splashing some black removal and hand attack. Like there's different ways to build it, and I think you do get rewarded. Or you're not saying one's better than the other, but there's a lot of different ways to build it, which is really interesting as well. All right. Well, I think that is it for us today. We'll not have a 2-hour podcast for our return, but we'll hopefully kind of reconvene, maybe do like a year-end review or something kind of before the holidays and just look at metagame shares or something. But yeah, thanks for
Well,
listening, and go ahead, Spencer. Oh yeah,
uh,
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say if I hat trick with Nadu, we can do a Nadu deep dive.
Oh, good
We could
call.
find we could
Yeah.
Can just talk about it for hours.
we're gonna lock you two in a we're gonna lock you two in a room.
We're single-handedly ruining the local meta. It's okay.
God bless. God bless.
I will say too, it's undetermined date at this time. We will try to get it out ASAP. That's actually my fault. But we are looking, or Spencer is looking at running another open before the end of the year. And so we'll try to get some details to that and very soon, aka I will work on that tomorrow.
Amazing. Yeah,
Also,
the Winter Classic. I think it's gonna be high stakes again. Well, I don't know if we're gonna do a duel. Maybe we'll do like a box of like Modern Horizons or like some Ancient Tombs or something.
all the
Some
mana
exciting
crypts.
prizes. No, yeah, not
Mana Crypt went up again. I'm so mad.
Oh my god.
why.
I don't know. It's just like back to $200 again. Like I went to get one, and the guy was like, "This is a creased French white border mana crypt. It is $160." Oh well,
I wonder why. I wonder if maybe there's some inside trading going on.
some chicanery. Yeah.
Chicanery.
Well, if you listener want to determine what we talk about next episode that's not Nadu based, how about you leave us a comment or send us a message on the Discord?
Sounds good. All right. Well,
Should
thanks again, gentlemen.
good talking to you.
Have a
Miss
good
you
night.
guys.
Have
See you
a
soon.
good one. Bye.